This is KFCF Fresno, your listener-sponsored radio station. Stay tuned now for Climate Politics with your host, Kevin Hall.
Good afternoon and welcome to Climate Politics. I'm your host, Kevin Hall. At the controls is Joey Hall, and today we'll be talking with Ashley Werner, Senior Attorney at Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, Carlton Jones of the Tulare City Council, and Holly Andradé Blair of the Lemoore City Council. Welcome to our first broadcast. This show is about climate change and the politics of climate change. Our conviction is that in order to address climate change in the San Joaquin Valley, we must also address our political climate. The smoke rising from the Ferguson fire is a daily grim reminder of the crisis on both fronts. This is a call-in show too, so you'll be invited to join the conversation and share your thoughts and questions. We'll be right back with a look at the news. Welcome back. You're listening to Climate Politics on KFCF 88.1 FM in Fresno. I'm your host, Kevin Hall. This show's mission is straightforward. We want to have a broader conversation about climate change in the San Joaquin Valley, one that focuses not just on climate-specific impacts and programs, but on the people who have their hands on the wheel, the politicians and corporate lobbyists who set the political climate throughout the valley and beyond. Our lineup of guests today will take us to hotspots in 3 counties, Tulare, Kings, and Fresno, and recent actions by the respective councils in the cities of Tulare, Lemoore, and Fresno. We'll talk first with Carlton Jones, who faced a firestorm for Facebook comments he posted that were critical of agriculture, and within weeks had to step down as mayor and resume his former position as a city council member. Next, Holly Andradé Blair from the Lemoore City Council will be calling into the show to talk about the conservative backlash she's facing there. Finally, Ashley Werner, Senior Attorney at Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability here in Fresno, will be in the studio for a deeper look at the politics of industrial development, environmental law, and cap-and-trade dollars flowing to Fresno. Welcome back. You're listening to Climate Politics on KFCF 88.1 FM in Fresno. I'm your host, Kevin Hall. Our first guest today is Tulare City Councilmember Carlton Jones, a Fresno firefighter and union leader who has served as president of our local firefighters union. Carlton lives in Tulare and was first elected to its city council in 2012 when the city went to by-district elections for the first time and re-elected in 2016. He was named mayor in December 2016, the first African-American mayor in city history, and agreed to step down as mayor last month in a council meeting crowded with people upset about a Facebook interaction in which the mayor spoke frankly about agriculture's negative impacts on human health and the environment. Carlton, welcome to Climate Politics, and please start off by telling us about the way this thing took off, what you experienced, and if it's over.
What took off? First of all, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us. We're really grateful you take the time from your day to call in. And, really just the Facebook controversy, Carlton.
You know what? It's funny. I think it was a lot more than just the politicized conversation that I had with the one farmer I'm not even sure if Eric is a farmer or not.
Mm-hmm.
That conversation was just two people arguing different sides of a political conversation, and it sounded like to me that in losing the argument, his feeling got hurt, so he kind of rallied some support by taking our personal conversation and putting it on the My Job Depends on Ag site. And there were still people in the community that was a little not too happy, to say the least, to see me in the position that I was in, that didn't really have a concern about rather my opinion on the effects of ag. It was just another bandwagon for them to jump on.
So I think you started to say there were some preceding issues and that maybe this was people were exploiting?
Oh, yeah. Like one of the council members, we couldn't even finish a council meeting without him saying, I don't want Carlton to be the mayor anymore. And he's just trying to set himself up in the rotation for him to be mayor, because unless there was a change before my term was up, he just didn't see a way that he could be mayor without being reelected. So there was that. And then, there's if if there's a crowd of people and the entire crowd isn't applauding when you win or do something good, you got to understand that those people aren't always on your side. And, and I understand that, with just being part of the election process and having to make decisions where your community is divided, you're not going to have everyone on your side. So as far as do I think this ag conversation will continue? Well, it should. And you'll see that it's going to. And with so many taxpayer dollars being aimed at assisting the ag in the issues that they continue to deny, I think, it's going to continue to be an issue. And, I've never been anti-ag. I've always bragged about the ag roots and history of my own city. I've always invited and encouraged people to come check out our World Ag Expo. So that was never an issue. And I've actually been on council since the first time I got elected was in 2006, and I served from 2006 to 2000 actually it was 2004. From 2004 to 2008, I was a city council member in Tulare, and then again in 2012 to current time. And you'll see that coming out and being against the ag industry or farming and dairy has never been my platform. But I've never been a person to ignore and sweep under the rug the truth of the issues in my community.
Well,
and,
Carlton, pardon me, but from what I read, it was a pretty straightforward comment, just acknowledging that activities are correlated with a number of impacts. There was nothing accusatory or attacking in your comment, but apparently it was enough to, when shared on this group, which I believe has more than 80,000 followers, trigger sort of a wave of what would you call it? Did it feel like an attack, or what was the theme of the response?
Well, it didn't feel like an attack to me because that was an energy that I would get at every other meeting. And I mean, from the day there was people that showed up to my meeting to where I was sworn in as mayor, and the only comments they wanted to get up and say was to address the council and say, "We hope you don't make him the mayor," with really no merit to their conversation. And their points was as baseless as the conversations that people would stand up and say, "Well, we don't want you to be mayor because we think you're against ag," and that's just a silly position to be in,
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I talked about is when I step up and say, "Hey, what we do as firefighters is causing cancer," it doesn't mean I'm against firefighting. It means that I understand and I see and believe that there are some risks and some special circumstances that comes with doing this job, that by identifying and admitting that there are some issues and concerns, we can then be safer at the ways we do them. And ag is an industry that has a lot of those same risks, especially when you talk about the different carcinogens and the types of air pollution that we see with just when you disc up cropland.
Yep.
And, I've learned that from being born and raised in the ag capital of the world.
Yep.
And I was pretty shocked when people would come and say, "We can't believe that you said that ag uses a lot of water." And it was almost comical.
Yeah.
Like, it does.
You're a little separated from reality if you deny that. Carlton, I want to thank you for calling in today. I wish to have you back on a future date. I thought on our first show here we'd do a quick roundup and get a taste of the strength of the different interests in the community, and I think you've given us a profound example. And just to kind of go back to the last question, what I meant by was the last part of my first question is the issue for you over at City Council as a City Council member, or are people still coming after you for being on City Council?
My district, I won with 70% of the vote.
Yep.
And the members in my district, the people that live in Tulare and work in Tulare,
Yep.
A lot of them aren't farmers. And a lot of them were the people that came up and spoke on my behalf. So for them, I think that they appreciate that they have someone that's honest, not afraid of the big money, and not going to be afraid to talk about serious issues. So for that, I think I'm safe.
Great. Sounds good.
The conversation, I don't think is going to end.
No, it can't end. We're all pushing that.
It
we are.
Yeah, we just want to be. We all want to work here and live here, we can until we know better. And if there's a situation in ag where we know there's a better way we can do things, I think as a community and as an industry, we should all be kind of rowing this boat in the same direction.
There it is.
And it's funny to kind of see that there's a little resistance, or I don't know if it's resistance or it's not what I said. They don't want me to be the person saying it. That may be the issue.
Thank you. We're going to take it. Carlton, thank you once again. We're going to take a short break and be back with our next guest, Holly Andradé Blair from the Lemoore City Council.
Back, all right, tell Holly I said hello, and
she heard you.
If you ever want to talk again.
Thank you. Will do.
Thank you.
Welcome back. You're listening to Climate Politics on KFCF 88.1 FM in Fresno. I'm your host, Kevin Hall. Our next guest is Holly Andradé Blair, a first-term member now in her third year on the Lemoore City Council. An English instructor at West Hills College, the Lemoore campus, Holly is an outspoken progressive Democrat who has found that party affiliation means almost nothing to voters in her district, and her consistent efforts at bringing transparency to her city's government has triggered a backlash from some very conservative vested interests. So how do you try to shut up an outspoken Latina councilwoman whose Kings County roots goes back generations? Let's find out. Holly Andradé Blair, welcome to Climate Politics. We only have about 5 minutes, so maybe the best place to start would be to tell us about your fellow council members' recent enactment and implementation of a code of conduct.
Yes, back in April, I began asking a lot of questions. I wanted a little bit more transparency from some of our public directors, and most specifically from our chief of police. I had questions, and in doing so, they didn't like not only that question, but some other questions I had raised regarding our budget and what was included in it and what wasn't, and our priorities in the city, and just getting that out to the public. And in doing so, they actually couldn't get me to stop asking these questions by just asking me or behind closed doors telling me very assertively. Instead, they decided, okay, well, if we can't do it that way, let's try to legally shut her up. Let's try to scare her. So they came up with a code of conduct. Now, this code of conduct was not codified as any sort of special ordinance or anything like that, but it would basically, have more, quote, decorum or civility. So they literally enacted this. They had a study session in the first reading a day that it was actually Ag Day at the Capitol, where I was up at the Capitol in support of, this county. And I was raining that day, so they knew I would be coming in late. So that's when they did the first reading of this code of conduct, which I already was against because it's just stupid. And then it's arbitrary. And then the actual code was enacted 5 minutes before I was put on trial for breaking that code of conduct. And I was listed on the agenda for breaking that code of conduct 4 days prior to a tweet that had Kendrick Lamar lyrics because he had just won the Pulitzer Prize, and I used his album in one of my lesson plans at the college. And in doing so, they actually used that tweet, which I tweeted 4 days after being put on the agenda for my conduct. And the second reading of that ordinance was passed 5 minutes before they put me on trial for that.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't laugh. I
know, it's insane. It's absolutely insane. It's all public record. It's all, documented. So, it's just insanity here.
And so what did the implementation of this code of conduct look like? What did they just say, bad person?
Well, I think what they were really trying to hammer down was trying to get me to not speak on my platform, which is on social media. I have quite a large following on my personal my personal profile page, on my Twitter feed, and on I have a page now on Facebook too. I'm also on Snapchat and Instagram, and I have following. And I was literally told at one point in one meeting, you have a platform now. You need to be careful what you say. In other words, if I'm saying something that's very conservative and Republican sounding, I'm A-OK. My heart's content. But the second I put something progressive, that I support environmental laws, I was a Bernie fan. I was very, very pro. I want education paid for my students. I'm a big fan of that, and as a teacher, and I just apparently shouldn't promote that on my social media page because, as a council member, people might be listening, and that's a big taboo here for somebody to be in a leadership position that's not the status quo.
Well, Holly, you grew up in the area. Your family's been there for generations. Tell me, what do you chalk this up to?
I chalk this up plain and simple to I'm a young Latina. I'm very different. I'm a young woman. I'm outspoken, and I very much know that when I'm talking about, when I'm speaking, they can't quite grasp that I actually am intelligent. I know what I'm saying, but a lot of it is these preconceived notions of what I should be like or how they want me to be, and I very purposefully don't censor myself. I grew up here, but my family were the farm workers, not the farm owners. And that's very different representation now. Because while I have been here for generations, I don't come from those good old boy families. I don't come from an affluent class. You know, my family didn't come from money. I grew up very, very poor in Avenel. And these issues touch me at a very personal level because not that long ago, I was the one that was in the shadows and felt voiceless. And now that I'm in a position to give a voice to people, I want to give a voice to the real community, the community that's suffering out there right now and is having a hard time. And really, the people who speak to those issues oftentimes sound really disingenuous. So I don't censor myself because you see, this is who I really am. I swear like a sailor. You might as well know that now. Instead of me putting on a polished look that's just fake and not really me, you get the real me. That's part of transparency.
Terrific. Holly, I want to thank you for calling in today. I wish we had more time. I'm trying to do this sort of roundup on this first show and check in with several areas, and your story is just compelling, so we'd love to check in again with you in a future show if you'll have the time for us.
Absolutely, anytime.
Thank you so much.
And please say hi to Carlton and Ashley.
Okay.
They're awesome people.
Certainly will. And thank you so much once again. We'll be right back with our next guest, Ashley Werner. Welcome back. You're listening to Climate Politics on KFCF 88.1 FM in Fresno. I'm your host, Kevin Hall. Our next guest is Ashley Werner, Senior Attorney at Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. Leadership Council is representing South Central Fresno Neighbors United in a lawsuit against the City of Fresno for its approval of the Caglia Industrial Warehouse project in the Reverse Triangle without conducting any environmental review. It was preceded by the massive Amazon and Ulta Beauty Products warehouses, which have been built, but the Caglia proposal is on hold for now. How is the city responding to the community outcry for relief? Let's listen to this clip from January 25th of this year, when residents turned out in opposition to the Caglia project and its lack of environmental review.
I wanted to take a few minutes to respond to some of the things that Ashley Werner has said tonight, and then also in myriads of emails that she sent to the city and addendums to those emails and letters and addendums to those letters. So to Ashley Werner and the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, which really, to me, those are poverty pimps. That organization's poverty pimps. They play on people's fears. They come down here constantly now, standing in the way of the very thing that these folks need.
Ashley, welcome to Climate Politics.
Or City Hall.
And I'm sorry to welcome you with that awful quote from Councilmember Steve Brandow, who represents Northwest Fresno, and I don't want to talk about him or the quote, but I did want to set the tone. You know, the climate is what we want to talk about. So maybe we could start with you giving us an overview of the situation, and I do understand you've got to be circumspect in your comments given the lawsuit, and I assume attempts to negotiate a settlement, but tell us what you can about what led to the legal action.
Mm-hmm. Well, if I could start with that night at City Hall. And I think there's more to it that dates back far beyond that night. But, when Steve Brandow made those comments, it preceded over an hour of resident testimony, I believe. And I encourage everybody who listens to this to go back and watch that video, because what his testimony doesn't cover or reference is the dozens of residents who came out from their neighborhood, community advocates from a whole wide range of community-based organizations who work daily with residents in the most impacted communities, people from the faith community, the air quality advocates, people concerned with labor standards, and came out and really spoke candidly about really serious concerns about potential health impacts of this project on people's lives, on people's access to good quality paying jobs, and the city's responsibility to ensure that as a region and in local neighborhoods and in the most impacted neighborhoods that residents have access to good environmental quality, and environmental quality that supports public health and access to opportunity. And so what Steve Brandow's comments did not reflect was a response to all of those very genuine concerns. And for many of the people who came there, it was their first time ever being in City Hall. So that was their first experience of our local democratic process. And I have to say it's tragic. That's not what we envision ourselves to be as a democracy. That's not what we expect of our elected leaders. We expect elected leaders to genuinely listen to the concerns of their constituents, to respond to them thoughtfully, especially when those concerns are coming from people who are from communities that have historically been excluded from public processes, when residents share stories about excessive cancer rates in their communities that have personally impacted them, and to not characterize comments based on one organization, and to make a characterization of all people or even people within an organization based on a prejudice or a coloration of an organization that's really not tied to facts. So I think it's just really important to provide a response to that comment. And to me, it is tragic. It's really tragic. And I think it highlights the importance of all of us getting involved with our local politics and changing the climate.
Is this, do you suppose, more than bigotry? Is there a strategy or a tactic being employed here to simply discourage people?
Yeah, I think first it discredits the residents who came and the validity of their voices and their opinions. It discredits their intelligence or attempts to, and as well as the people who work closely alongside of them and who are trying to advocate for their interests. So I think the message is essentially shut up and stay out.
Now, what's interesting, though, is the City Council voted unanimously 7-0 to move ahead with the Cagliar project despite any environmental review.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to point out. While Steve Brandau's comments were the most blatantly disrespectful of the community, and I want to recognize that Councilmember Esmeralda Soria called Steve Brandau out for that and apologized on behalf of the whole council. Every single member of the council voted for this project to go forward, and none of them responded to any of the concerns brought up by the residents about the fact that there was absolutely no information about the amount of water that would be used by this project, and the residents who live in this neighborhood are all on domestic wells which have gone dry during the drought. So for them, the possibility that this project is going to compete with them for water, it means potentially pushing them out of their own homes if there are no mitigation measures in place for that. The fact that there would be 6,200 truck trips a day passing in front of residents' homes, and what would that do to the quality of life of residents who are right next door on the 2-lane road? In the city of Fresno, we wouldn't even allow a roadway through a community in the river bluffs to allow access to the river, when that would have been, no truck trips probably, and very few cars every day.
Maybe if you compared it to the Olive Avenue debate recently about producers and their trucks.
And how so specifically? Well,
I believe maybe that was a matter of a few hundred.
Yeah, so in that case, there was a few hundred, and I think that there were some people involved in that debate who did have more connections at City Hall and were able at least to stall the process from going forward. And I think as an organization, Leadership Council works to ensure that no residents are impacted by health burdens. That's a neighborhood that has a lot of historically disadvantaged residents.
Maybe we should place that neighborhood in people's minds for them. My theory on why it's called the reverse triangle is that a normal way of orienting oneself in Fresno is that 99 is over toward the west and 41 is toward the east. But when you get below downtown, they cross. And so that creates a reversal of those freeways. Right. How's that work for you?
Right. So this neighborhood that's being directly impacted by the reverse triangle industrial development plans, most of the community is in unincorporated territory. They're just south of the city's limits, which puts them in an even more vulnerable position. They don't have a city council member who is directly accountable to them. They do have a supervisor, but most residents have never heard from their supervisor or met their supervisor.
They're not weighing in at City Hall.
They're not weighing in. The county has not actively engaged on this matter. And it also means they haven't been the recipient of any city services.
How bad is this neighborhood in terms of impacts?
Well, so first of all, it is there is a tool called CalEnvirus Green, which the California EPA created to rank neighborhoods throughout California for environmental pollution burdens based on sociodemographic and environmental indicators. This neighborhood comes up as the most burden in California. So when you rank every single census tract in California, this one has the worst for every single indicator combined.
So is there a chance that the Caglia industrial projects already in place, such as the Orange Avenue dump / landfill, which is closed and I know is monitored by the state for water quality issues, and then some soils next to their facilities, are these areas of concern? Yeah,
there's a whole array of concerns. So just some of this data that's being looked at when we rank this neighborhood as among the worst in the state, it is it's diesel emissions from trucks, it's ozone, it's toxic releases from facilities, it's toxic groundwater contamination. So it is a whole series of issues. We know that there's at least 3 sites that are listed on the Department of Toxic Substance Control's registry surrounding the project site. And those sites have all tested for serious water contamination with a whole variety of contaminants that are known to be carcinogens. And the residents, like I was saying, are reliant on domestic wells. Every single household we've talked to has had at least 1 cancer incident, if not 2 or 3, including deaths.
We're talking with Ashley Werner from Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. She's a senior attorney with the organization, and they are representing South Central Fresno Neighbors United in a lawsuit against the city of Fresno. Just one part of the great work that Leadership Council does here and around the state. So Ashley, I'm interested again in this unanimous vote. What is it about the city council or city hall or whatever you would ascribe it to that led to such resistance or at least disinterest that night back in January when people turned out in large numbers? And also in the context of the fact that Amazon and Ulta were already approved and built, and they must be having some comparable impacts as the Caglia proposal might.
Right. I think there's a number of different factors contributing, and I think first and foremost it goes down to having a culture where residents' voices, especially residents from our most disadvantaged communities, the ones that lack sidewalks and streetlights and that are surrounded by these facilities, that their voices don't matter. If they did matter, there would have been a direct response and there would have been consideration of their points. I think there's a sense that maybe residents don't know what they're talking about and that they're manipulated by nonprofits. And I have heard council members state that from the dais to try to discredit people who come and present their genuine stories and testimony. I think it's also really important to look at the fact of who was behind this project. I can't speak exactly to what the council members' individuals' motivations were when they made their decision to approve this project, but I think it's really important for us to note that the recipient of the benefits of that approval happens to be one of the largest campaign contributors to not only the mayor's campaign races, but also many of the city council members. We're not seeing votes go forward that are happening in the reverse manner, where it's those with much fewer resources to contribute to campaigns that are the beneficiaries, while project developers have to wait. We know Fresno has a storied history regarding developers and campaign contributions and how that has impacted votes both in the city of Fresno and other local jurisdictions. And
greasing the skids, as it were.
Yeah.
I want to give out the phone-in number. This is a talk show, and I know I said that at the beginning, but if you'd like to join the conversation with Ashley Werner, the number here is 559-266-8888, 559-266-8888. I'm Kevin Hall. You're listening to Climate Politics, and we're talking with Ashley Werner, senior attorney with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, about more than just this one project now, Ashley, but you've been interacting with City Hall on a number of fronts for a number of years now. And do you see a change in the climate, or how would you describe the climate? What is your opinion of just, again, why this was allowed, why people didn't respond to these issues? What sets the mind, or what creates the mindset?
I think we have a fundamental core problem that remains in place that I don't think I've seen change in any fundamental way. I think we do have a problem as a city that I think we really need. I'm really glad that your show is looking specifically at this problem. I think we need a lot more dialogue on it. I hope more local and state media outlets continue to, dig into the issue. But, of who has the say, who has power at City Hall, who gets backdoor access, who knows about projects well in advance. So for this project, residents weren't notified ahead of time. The only way we found out about this project before it was fully approved was through a newspaper article where an enterprising reporter happened to find out about it. But otherwise, the project would have gone through with approval by the development director with no resident input at all. So I think it speaks to a deeply entrenched culture we have at City Hall, which I have seen personally at countless City Hall hearings that I've attended in really unfortunate ways that discredit residents. And I don't want to say there haven't been times when I have seen City Hall elected officials and certainly staff be responsive to residents, acknowledge concerns, move good projects forward. But when there is a powerful entity on the opposite side of that, it is rare, if ever, that we see that kind of progress.
Well, and isn't there a deeper policy at work, though? I mean, they're choosing to not conduct a full environmental review, right, in compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act. So that is an institutionalized practice, and is it? How do we characterize that? I mean, is because these projects are all going into neighborhoods of color and low income?
I think that's one aspect of it. What I've also seen with our decision makers, many of them, is I think that there is a sort of lawlessness that is part of our mentality in the San Joaquin Valley, often with local jurisdictions. We don't have as many organizations here that can, like through litigation or other means, enforce state legal standards compared to some other parts of the state. So I think jurisdictions have been able to choose the standard of review that they've wanted to go forward with without any sort of pushback on that in many ways for a long time. I think there's also ideological considerations at play. I think there's many local electeds who just simply do not believe. They don't believe they should be subjected to these laws. They don't believe in the validity of these environmental laws. They don't believe they're necessary, and they think they stop progress. And I think our response is these laws are civil rights laws. They allow residents who have been excluded from processes, who have not had the backdoor access, to have a spot at the table, to provide their concerns about how their neighborhood and their health is going to be impacted and be required to have a response. And they're also, beyond civil rights laws, they're necessary for all of us. We have some of the worst air quality in the country. We're all every single one of us is experiencing it right now with the fires that are happening. It is exacerbating it. I personally know people who are moving out of the Central Valley because their children are in the ER. And it's something that we're just not taking seriously in the way it deserves.
I'm going to give out our phone number again. If anybody wants to call in and join the conversation, I will have no problem filling the time with Ashley. There's so much to go into here. But the number, if you want to call, is 559-266-8888. 559-266-88. This is Climate Politics. I'm Kevin Hall. You're listening to KFCF. So, Ashley, Leadership Council also had a larger struggle in recent months and years over climate change dollars that were directed to come to Fresno in support of the high-speed rail station under the greenhouse gas reduction funds. And that $70 million, as specifically line itemed, I believe, by the governor, was to, in his mind, and the mind of local elected leaders, to be within a 1 mile radius of high-speed rail downtown. But y'all managed to shift that a little. And I know you're part of a coalition,
Yes.
but in the effort, a big, broad coalition, but I know leadership did play a key role, especially in Sacramento.
Yeah, and I think our engagement as an organization with the $70 million started out as our part of our membership is with the California Environmental Justice Alliance. That was the organization which sponsored the program, the Transformative Climate Communities program, which actually created this source of funding. And the purpose of the funding, as envisioned by environmental justice advocates who work with residents who are most impacted, is to bring together various sorts of sources of funding to have significant investments that can really create a catalytic effect in impacted communities that have suffered from disinvestment, so that we create co-benefits of jobs, environmental health, good neighborhood conditions, all of the varied resources that residents in these communities need to thrive, in which they have been deprived of historically. And so with that, when Fresno got chosen to receive this money, of course, given all of the work that we do in this community and our close relationship with residents from around the city and county of Fresno, we wanted to ensure that residents were deeply engaged from the very beginning in determining how this money would be spent. Because, of course, it is residents themselves who are the ones who know best how this money should be spent and how it will best impact themselves. And I think we saw it also as so fundamental because there's so much deep distrust built up in communities that have been impacted by disinvestment and that have been excluded from decision-making processes. And specifically in this context, West Fresno, we can all see just driving into that community how distinct it looks from other parts of Fresno and all of the basic public and private resources that it's lacked. And so we were very committed to ensuring that residents in that community and in other parts of South Fresno were engaged in this process. And so initially there was the city had worked with the Central Valley Community Foundation to develop like a small group that would lead a process of determining how the funds would be spent. There was we were told that the money was going downtown. That was just the end of it. And that's not what the bill said. The bill said it was supposed to go to the most impacted communities, and really that there had to be resident engagement incorporated throughout the process. And so we worked very closely with the Building Healthy Communities Coalition, Faith and Community, Communities for New California, a whole series of community benefits organizations who are working with residents around the city. And then there was a lot of organizing by residents without community benefits organizations that, occurs every single day.
But here you are politically, right? It's a political discussion at this point. It's a political where you're forcing a process to occur where residents, the community organizations you mentioned and others, I'm sure, managed to somehow convince residents to put their trust in this process. Or they have to get.
I think trust is maybe a bit much.
Get them in the door at least, and then let's try if we build some trust.
Yeah, I think it was a long. This process took place over the course of about a year and a half, and it was a process of reminding people what the statute says, that people have a right to be engaged in this process. That this is their taxpayer dollars, and that fundamentally this money is supposed to benefit their communities, and people felt very strongly about that and saw this as a chance to make real transformation in their neighborhoods. And so they really stepped up, and community members worked with us. Community members worked in their own circles and really took the city on to hold them accountable, and also took the state on to hold the state accountable. Many residents traveled up to Sacramento multiple times to attend Strategic Growth Council hearings to testify about the need for strong regulations implementing this law that would ensure a robust community process, the need to ensure that staff members from Strategic Growth Council were communicating with the city of Fresno to communicate clear requirements about opening the process up.
Well, imagine you're in a way setting a precedent for the rest of the state in that. The way they do it year one in Fresno, this could play out in other communities, right? So get it right here.
Yeah, and so what happened with this process was, I think it was in large part an incredible success. It started out from something that was pretty much a largely a closed door process.
This almost slipped by. I mean, this was almost another one of these done deals.
Yeah. Well, that was how it was portrayed to us. It is a done deal. It's going downtown. It's going around the high-speed rail station. It's going to build out the downtown neighborhood specific plan, and not the West Fresno Southwest specific plan, which had just been developed, not for their community college.
All about what I call the Fulton Stripped Mall.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, it was a really amazing process that was much publicized all around, including by the city of Fresno, with this amazing, historic, as it was called by many politicians that night, vote with, I think it was 171 or so people that voted in support of a plan that was created by residents of West Fresno, that directed it directed money to West Fresno, downtown, and Chinatown, but with the most significant portion of it going to West Fresno.
So you managed to crack the political logjam that is Fresno.
Yes.
And
I think the keys to that were really deep and continuous community involvement, people persisting, not giving up, a coalition of residents from many different neighborhoods, a coalition of nonprofits that all of them stayed the course together, and working both to hold the city of Fresno accountable and then the state accountable.
Well, it seems like one has a little more greater chance of success in the state venue because of the greater awareness, and people there are much more familiar with environmental justice issues and basic environmental law.
Yeah, I think we were really appreciative.
Less lawless than Fresno.
Yes. We were really appreciative of the partnerships that we developed there, because I think that there were many voices within the Strategic Growth Council. We're actually honoring Randall Winston, who's their former executive director, at our upcoming fundraiser in Sacramento in August, for his role really in this program and in other parts in dedication to environmental justice, and that means having residents at the table at all parts of these critical decisions.
So that was a big effort, just to kind of I should give out the number again. I think everybody's driving home, nobody's calling, but I'm having that's just fine. It's an option. It's 266-8888. I'm Kevin Hall. We're talking with Ashley Werner from Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, and I'm going to loop back to Caglia, come back to this Caglia project. A couple of things I wanted to bring up. One was the State Attorney General has decided to weigh in on this lawsuit. And before you tell us about it, I want to give you the Caglia quote that turned up from a release they sent out about his development. He said, "This development will provide jobs and economic opportunities that this lawsuit claims that it will harm, and holds our neighbors hostage from improving their lives and off of welfare and back to work."
Yeah, I don't even know what to say.
You do, but you don't. But we're on air. You're not allowed to.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, like our clients aren't on welfare. They all have various forms of jobs.
This is bigotry. I mean, you don't have to say it, but it's bigotry.
Yeah, and it's it's another example of what exactly Steve Brandau did of utterly dismissing the validity of people's concerns about their lives, and also I think kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth, because this project would never happen next to Mr. Caglia's home,
right.
And nobody wants for their children to have thousands of trucks in front of their home every day. That's not good for those children's economic production capacity. When they have asthma and they're stuck in the hospital and they miss school, when they can't walk outside.
But these are the kids at Orange Central Elementary School that are right there on Cherry Avenue, right?
Yeah.
And so you're looking at communities that the kids are literally walking along these major streets without sidewalks.
Right. Yeah.
To get to school.
Right. And so there's some sidewalks planned for development alongside the industrial facilities, but not next to where the residents live.
Yeah.
Not along the schools. The Orange Center Elementary School is about 500 feet. The playground is about 500 feet from the Ulta Beauty Center that was recently went up. And so I think what that statement reflects is just it is this disregard for really the value of people's lives. They're not economic machines that are just meant to go work in an Amazon facility only. They have to be able to live, play, and learn, which entails breathing and drinking clean water and having a home to live in. We have client meetings in one of the residents' homes who's impacted, and being there constantly, we feel the rumbling of vibration from trucks that are already going by to the existing facilities. She can't sleep at night very well because there's the lights from Amazon shining right into her bedroom window.
Wow.
So there's a whole series of really severe
impacts. So to your point, there's a real small example, but an important one of when one does environmental review and one looks at mitigating impacts on neighbors. That, for example, is an issue that could be brought up.
Yeah.
But the city didn't want to look at any of that. And so one other thing is you made the paper recently yet again, and this time through no direct effort of your own. That it turned out that the mayor, Fresno Mayor Lee Brand, went on a little vacation in Yellowstone National Park with Councilmember Paul Capriolio and Fresno businessman Richard Caglia, as well as John Shahady from Producers, who was the Olive Avenue project I mentioned earlier. But the quote that the good mayor gave to the Fresno Bee was, "There's nothing really here. People have the right to relax. There's no conspiracy. The Shahady family and Caglia family have been doing business in Fresno for years. If I went with someone who was convicted or a felon or 4 Russian spies, maybe there'd be something there. These are all people who are upstanding citizens. if Ashley Werner were there, maybe you'd have a story. Wow.
I know, it's pretty good. We've been called job killers and housing killers. We haven't been compared to Russian spies before, as far as I know.
You're not
so
an
that's the
upstanding
new one.
citizen,
I'm
apparently.
Not, no.
And you know, there's even like the earlier comment about poverty pimp. There's sexual innuendo working its way into these comments too. So, you know, there's a misogyny here. I mean, now
Yeah.
you got attacked. There you are at the microphone, and there's Brando up there on the dais just going after you. Anybody would quake in that circumstance. You know, it's a packed city hall. How do you keep your composure when dealing with this sort of idiocy?
Well, I'm actually kind of glad. I'm kind of glad they didn't let me come up to respond to that comment, because I have no idea what it would have looked like. I mean, I think there was a lot of like factual inaccuracies I wanted to correct, but I might not have said it as gracefully as I wanted to. But you know, I think what it comes down to me is just that it's, you know, it's not so much that it makes like me mad or offended. It makes me really sad for the state of like the quality of our elected officials and how seriously they take these matters that impact people's lives. And it's not as much about me. It's about how they are disrespecting and ignoring residents.
This little vacation trip. I mean, Mark Arex, you know, Fresno author and former reporter, once described it as Fresno's arrested sense of propriety.
Yeah.
You know, a nice way of saying the lawlessness.
Yeah. Well, there was I think Marek Warzinski, if I'm saying that correctly.
You are, I think.
There is Wazarski, sorry, is a Fresno Bee reporter who followed up with an opinion article.
Yep.
And I mean, I think that he touched on some important points that, I mean, he said them with some humor to them, but that, you know, given Fresno's history and, you know, documented history where the FBI was even involved with inappropriate developer relationships with council members, that, you know, the residents are owed a serious response to that. While, you know, maybe totally true that the mayor is just vacationing with friends, that's a question that he owes the community a serious response, especially when that developer, you know, is now gotten the city into, well, the city and the developer are both being sued by the Attorney General's office. Taxpayers are paying for the city's defense of that lawsuit. There's no indemnity agreement that we're aware of. And that developer also happened to have helped get the mayor into office as one of his biggest campaign.
I think I calculated $60,000 worth of contributions to the mayor's campaign. Ashley, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to end a little early because we're going to do a pledge break. Okay. You're not invited to stay for that. It's nothing
Thank you.
You want. So we'll take a short break. And once again, this is Ashley Werner with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. I'm Kevin Hall. This is Climate Politics, and we'll be right back.
Thank you.